The little girl was wearing her father's watch. It was 3 sizes too big. She had wrapped tape around it just to keep it from falling off her small wrist. She sat in the front row of The Tonight Show. Row A, seat 7. Right where her father should have been sitting. In her other hand, she clutched a folded piece of paper. A letter her father had written but never sent. 300 people in that studio had no idea what was coming. When Johnny Carson asked her name, she answered. When he asked where her daddy was, she told the truth. And when she leaned close and whispered 5 words into his ear, Johnny Carson's face went white. His hands started shaking. He tried to speak but no sound came out. And then he did something he had never done in 24 years of television. He walked off the stage. It was April 23, 1986. NBC Studios, Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was filming live. 11 million Americans were watching from their living rooms. The band stopped playing mid-note. Ed McMahon stood up from his chair, confused and alarmed. The studio audience sat frozen, not understanding what they were witnessing. The director's voice crackled through Johnny's earpiece, panicked and desperate. Johnny, we're live. Where are you going? But Johnny Carson wasn't listening. He disappeared backstage while the cameras kept rolling. For 7 minutes, America watched an empty stage. 7 minutes of dead air. 7 minutes that would become the most talked about moment in Tonight Show history. Nobody in that audience understood what had just happened. But the little girl knew. She knew exactly what those 5 words meant. She knew exactly why Johnny Carson had to leave. And she knew that her father's final wish had just come true. If you're already feeling this story, drop a like right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you see Johnny Carson forever. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. She was 9 years old. Brown hair pulled into 2 small ponytails. Big hazel eyes that had seen too much sadness for someone so young. 8 weeks before that night, Sarah's world had shattered into pieces. Her father, David Jenkins, was 38 years old. He worked as an electrician in Glendale, California. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't famous. But to Sarah, he was everything. David Jenkins had one obsession in life. One thing that made him smile no matter how exhausting his day had been. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Every single night, without fail, David would settle into his old leather recliner. Sarah would climb onto his lap, her small head resting against his chest. And together, they would watch Johnny's monologue. David knew every joke by heart. He could mimic Johnny's timing, his gestures, even the way he adjusted his tie before a punchline. He would practice Johnny's golf swing in their tiny backyard. He would repeat Johnny's one-liners at the dinner table until Sarah's mother would laugh and shake her head. "Why do you love Johnny so much, Daddy?" Sarah asked him once. David's answer was simple and honest. "Because when I watch him, sweetheart, I forget that life is hard. He makes me believe that no matter how bad things get, there's always something worth smiling about." 3 months before the accident, David did something crazy. He entered a radio contest. KABC was giving away 2 front-row tickets to a Tonight Show taping. David called in 247 times over one weekend. His fingers were sore from dialing. His voice was hoarse from talking to busy signals. But on Sunday night at 11:47 p.m., he got through. He answered the trivia question correctly. And he won 2 front-row tickets to The Tonight Show. April 23, 1986. Row A, seats 6 and 7. David screamed so loud the neighbors came running. He picked Sarah up and spun her around the kitchen until they were both dizzy and laughing. "We're going to see Johnny, baby girl. Front row. We're going to be so close we can hear him breathe." Sarah had never seen her father so happy. She didn't know that in 3 months, everything would change. Then February 18 happened. A drunk driver ran a red light on Brand Boulevard. Hit David's pickup truck on the driver's side. The impact was catastrophic. David Jenkins was pronounced dead at the scene. Sarah was supposed to go with him that day. They were heading to the hardware store together. But a last-minute stomachache kept her home. She never got to say goodbye. But David had left something behind. The tickets. They were still tucked inside his wallet when the police returned his belongings to Sarah's mother. 2 front-row seats to The Tonight Show. April 23, 1986. Non-refundable. Non-transferable. One of them still had David Jenkins' name printed on it. Sarah's mother, Linda, didn't know what to do with them. Throwing them away felt like throwing away the last piece of her husband's dream. But going without him seemed impossible. How could they sit in those seats and laugh when David would never laugh again? Sarah made the decision for her. "I want to go, Mommy." Linda looked at her daughter. This tiny 9-year-old who hadn't smiled since the funeral. Who barely ate. Who woke up crying every night, calling for a father who would never answer. "Honey, it might be too sad." It might hurt too much. Sarah shook her head firmly. Daddy won a contest for those tickets. He wanted to take me. If we don't go, his dream dies too. I don't want his dream to die, Mommy. Linda broke down crying. Her 9-year-old daughter was thinking more clearly than any adult in the room. They would go. The night before the taping, Linda found Sarah sitting on her bed. She was writing something carefully, slowly, concentrating hard on every word. What's that, baby? Sarah folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. It's for Johnny. Linda assumed it was a drawing. A child's thank you note. Maybe a simple, we love you, message. She didn't push. She should have. The morning of April 23rd arrived cold and gray. Sarah woke up at 5 a.m. She put on her best dress, a light blue one her father had bought her for Christmas. And then she did something that broke Linda's heart. She went to her father's closet. She found his wristwatch. The silver one with the black leather band that he wore every single day. Sarah, honey, that's too big for you. I know, Mommy. Sarah wrapped tape around it. 3 layers of clear packing tape, carefully wound so the watch wouldn't slide off her small wrist. Daddy's coming with us, Sarah said quietly. He has to be there. Linda couldn't argue with that. The drive to NBC Studios felt endless. Sarah sat in the back seat, clutching that folded letter, staring out the window at a city her father would never see again. When they arrived at the studio, the energy was electric. People laughing, people excited, people buzzing with anticipation. This was the hottest ticket in television. Sarah didn't smile. They were led inside by an NBC page. A young woman with a clipboard and a bright smile. You two are in row A. Front row. You're so lucky. Linda forced a smile. Sarah said nothing. They took their seats. Row A, seats 6 and 7. Sarah sat in seat 7. The seat her father had won. Seat 6 sat empty beside them. Linda leaned over and whispered, Daddy's watching from heaven, sweetheart. Sarah nodded slowly. I know, Mommy. That's why I have to give Johnny the letter. Linda froze. What letter, Sarah? What did you write? But before Sarah could answer, the lights dimmed. The band began to play the iconic Tonight Show theme. Ed McMahon's voice boomed through the studio. Here's Johnny. And Johnny Carson walked through that curtain. The audience erupted. Applause, cheers, whistles. Johnny smiled and waved. He looked good that night. Sharp suit, perfect hair, that trademark twinkle in his eye. He launched into his monologue. Politics. Hollywood gossip. A joke about California traffic. The audience ate it up. But Sarah wasn't laughing. She was staring at Johnny Carson with an intensity that didn't belong on a child's face. Her small hands gripped the armrests of her seat. Her father's watch hung loose on her wrist. The folded letter sat in her lap. Johnny kept going. He was a professional. He'd done this 5,000 times before. But something kept pulling his attention. A little girl in the front row. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't clapping. She was just staring at him with eyes that seemed too old, too sad. Johnny tried to ignore it. But every few seconds, his gaze drifted back to her. Something about that oversized watch on her tiny wrist. Something about the way she clutched that piece of paper. Something about the empty seat beside her. Johnny finished his last joke. The audience roared with laughter. And in that brief moment of silence before the applause faded, Sarah stood up. Linda grabbed her arm. Sarah, no. Sit down. But Sarah pulled away. She was already moving. Walking toward the stage. Security stepped forward, but Johnny raised his hand. Wait. Let her come. The audience went silent. You could hear the hum of the stage lights. Johnny walked to the edge of the stage and knelt down. His knees cracked. He didn't care. He looked at Sarah. Really looked at her. And for the first time that night, Johnny Carson wasn't performing. He was just a man, kneeling in front of a hurting child. What's your name, sweetheart? Sarah's voice was small but steady. Sarah. Sarah Jenkins. Hi, Sarah. Is everything okay? Sarah shook her head. My daddy loved you, Mr. Carson. Johnny smiled warmly. Well, that's very kind. Is your daddy here tonight? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. He died 2 months ago. Car accident. The audience gasped. Johnny's smile disappeared. Oh, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Sarah nodded, trying to hold herself together. He won these tickets. He called the radio 247 times. He wanted to bring me here more than anything. Johnny's throat tightened. I'm sure your daddy is watching right now, Sarah. He wrote you a letter, Sarah said. She held up the folded paper. Before he won the tickets, he wrote this. He said if he ever met you, he wanted you to read it. He never got to meet you, Mr. Carson. So I brought it for him. Johnny stared at the letter. then at Sarah. Then back at the letter. He reached out slowly and took it from her small hands. The paper was worn. Folded and unfolded many times. The edges were soft with handling. Johnny unfolded it carefully. The audience watched in complete silence. Johnny began to read. At first, his face was calm. Professional. Then something changed. His eyebrows pulled together. His jaw clenched. His lips pressed into a thin line. He kept reading. And then Johnny Carson's hands began to tremble. Ed McMahon stood up. "Johnny?" The director's voice came through the earpiece. "Johnny, we're live. What's happening?" Johnny didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes were filling with tears. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. The letter shook in his hands. He covered his mouth. The king of late night. The man who had entertained America for 24 years. The man who had never broken character on live television. Was crying. His shoulders shook. 300 people sat in stunned silence. Sarah stepped closer. She reached out and touched Johnny's hand. "Daddy said you would understand, Mr. Carson." Her voice was so small, so gentle. "He said you were the only person in the world who would understand." Johnny looked at her through his tears. His voice cracked. Barely a whisper. "Sarah, your father? I had no idea." And then Sarah leaned close. She stood on her tiptoes. She put her small hand on Johnny's shoulder. And she whispered 5 words. 5 words that no microphone picked up. 5 words that only Johnny Carson heard. And whatever those words were, they broke him. Johnny stood up abruptly. He didn't say anything to the audience. He didn't explain. He just turned and walked off stage. The cameras kept rolling. Ed McMahon stood there, helpless. The band didn't know what to do. The audience sat frozen. And for 7 minutes, 7 eternal minutes, America watched an empty stage. What was in that letter? What did David Jenkins write that shattered Johnny Carson on live television? And what 5 words did a 9-year-old girl whisper that made the king of late night walk away from his own show? The answer reveals a secret that connects a father's love, a daughter's courage, and the true power of laughter in the face of unbearable pain. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Because what happens next will stay with you forever. Backstage, Johnny Carson sat on a metal folding chair. His head in his hands. Tears streaming down his face. The letter lay open on the table beside him. A producer approached carefully. "Johnny, we're still live. We need you back out there." Johnny didn't move. "Give me a minute." "Johnny, it's been 5 minutes. The network is." "I said give me a minute." It was the first time anyone had heard Johnny Carson raise his voice backstage. The producer backed away. Johnny picked up the letter again. He read it one more time. And then he stood up. He wiped his face. He straightened his tie. And he walked back onto that stage. The audience erupted into applause. But Johnny held up his hand for silence. He sat down at his desk. He looked directly into the camera. And he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to tell you something." His voice was raw. Unpolished. Real. "I need to tell you about David Jenkins." He held up the letter. David Jenkins was an electrician from Glendale, California. He was 38 years old. He had a wife, Linda, and a daughter, Sarah. He loved his family. He worked hard. And every night, he watched the show. Johnny's voice cracked, but he pushed through. "David wrote me this letter 6 months ago. He never sent it. But his daughter brought it here tonight because David died in a car accident 2 months ago. He never got to use the tickets he won. He never got to sit in that front row seat. But his daughter came anyway." The audience was crying now. Strangers reaching for each other's hands. "In this letter, David told me something I never knew. Something I never could have imagined." Johnny paused. He looked down at the letter. And then he read it aloud. "Dear Mr. Carson, you don't know me. You'll never meet me. But I need to tell you what you did for me. When I was 11 years old, my father died. Heart attack. No warning. One day he was there, the next day he was gone. I stopped talking. I stopped eating. I stopped believing that anything good could ever happen again. One night, my mother turned on the television. Your show came on. You told a joke about a penguin and a priest. I don't even remember the joke. But I remember that I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in 4 months. And that laugh saved my life, Mr. Carson. It reminded me that joy could still exist. That even when everything hurt, there was still a reason to keep going. I've watched your show every single night for 27 years. You've been there for me through every hard moment of my life. You've made me laugh when I thought I'd never laugh again. Now I have a daughter. Her name is Sarah. She's 9 years old, and she's the best thing that ever happened to me. Every night, she sits on my lap and we watch you together. And I tell her the same thing you taught me, no matter how hard life gets, there's always something worth smiling about. I won tickets to your show, Mr. Carson. Front row. I'm going to bring Sarah. We're going to see you in person. It's a dream I've had for 27 years. But if I don't make it, if something happens to me before April 23rd, I want you to know this. You taught me how to be a father. You taught me that laughter isn't about forgetting pain. It's about surviving it. And you gave me the strength to keep going when I thought I couldn't take another step. Thank you, Mr. Carson. Thank you for saving my life when I was 11. And thank you for teaching me how to save my daughter's life every single day by making her smile. If Sarah comes to your show without me, please tell her something for me. Tell her that her daddy loved her more than anything in the world. Tell her that laughter is how we stay alive. And tell her that I'll be watching from wherever I am, smiling because she's there. With gratitude, David Jenkins. Johnny folded the letter. He set it down gently on his desk. He looked at Sarah, who was still standing near the stage. And then Johnny Carson did something he had never done before. He walked into the audience. He knelt down in front of Sarah. And he spoke directly to her. Sarah, your father didn't just write me a letter. He left you a gift. Sarah looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. He taught you the most important lesson anyone can learn, that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes shape. Johnny reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his pocket square. The blue silk one he'd worn on every episode for 15 years. He folded it carefully and placed it in Sarah's hands. I want you to have this. Every time you miss your daddy, hold this and remember, he's still making you smile. Because he brought you here tonight. He made sure his dream came true, even though he couldn't be here himself. Sarah clutched the pocket square. And then she whispered something. Not to the audience. Not to the cameras. Just to Johnny. Years later, Linda would reveal what Sarah said in that moment. But first, Johnny stood up. He turned to the audience. And he made a promise. David Jenkins taught me something tonight that I'll never forget. This show isn't just entertainment. For some people, it's a lifeline. It's a reminder that no matter how dark things get, there's always a reason to keep going. The audience rose to their feet. The applause lasted nearly 3 minutes. But Johnny wasn't finished. He looked at Sarah one more time. Sarah, I'm going to make you a promise. Every year on your birthday, I'm going to dedicate a joke to your father. So no matter where you are, you'll know that someone remembers him. And someone is still trying to make the world smile, just like he did. Johnny Carson kept that promise. Every single year until his final broadcast in 1992. On Sarah's birthday, he would pause during his monologue and say, "This one's for David." And then he'd tell a joke. Sarah Jenkins is 47 years old today. She works as a trauma counselor in Los Angeles. She specializes in helping children who have lost parents. On her office wall hangs Johnny Carson's pocket square in a gold frame. Next to it, her father's letter. And beside that, a photograph of her father wearing that silver watch. Sarah still wears the watch. It fits now. Every morning she puts it on, and every morning she remembers. Her father's dream didn't die. It lived on through her. And that night on April 23, 1986, when she whispered those 5 words to Johnny Carson. The 5 words that made him walk off his own show. She said, "He loved you like family." Johnny understood. Because sometimes, the people who save us are the ones we never meet. Sometimes, a voice on a television can be the difference between giving up and holding on. And sometimes, a 9-year-old girl carrying her father's watch and his final letter can remind us all why laughter matters. Not because it erases the pain, but because it helps us survive it. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And remember, the people we love never really leave us. They just find new ways to make us smile.